line about nothing. Why won't you go get you $1 or something? $1 or something. $1 or something.
Recording live in the Conscious Creative Media Studios from somewhere in the middle of nowhere, North Carolina, you are listening to the world's greatest photography podcast with your host, Bill Howard.
Thank you, Scott. And yes, we are the world's greatest photography podcast, and I am your host, Bill Howard. We can be heard on all major podcast carriers, as well as seen on YouTube. So you can see all the action at Conscious Creative Media. That's creative with a C-R-E-8-I-V-E. Each week we'll have this podcast that'll show up on the podcast sites, and then on YouTube it'll come out on Monday, Wednesday, and Fridays in 3 different segments. Today we're going to talk real estate photography, and I have with us the owner-operator of MichiganVideoTours.com. On Instagram, you can find him at It's Brian Kurtz, K-U-R-T-Z. And obviously, this is Brian Kurtz. How you doing today, Brian?
Doing very well, Bill. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you for coming on board with us today. The first segment that we're going to go into is a segment we call Spray and Pray. Mm-hmm. And basically, Spray and Pray is where I ask questions and our guests give answers in hopes of finding something to talk about, because although this is the world's greatest photography podcast, I am not necessarily the world's greatest podcast host. So, real simple. DSLR or mirrorless for real estate photography?
Mirrorless for sure. For me, yeah.
How long ago did you convert over?
I started with mirrorless in 2016, so I've never used the other one.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm going with Sony, I would guess.
Yep. Started with Sony, still with Sony. Probably be with Sony for a while. Yep.
Okay. The Sony has really upped the game on Nikon and Canon to try to catch up, and I think it's probably a good thing. I'm not sold on mirrorless myself. Of course, I shoot some other genres as well, such as sports photography, but yeah, it's really changed the way the market is looking. Now, when you shoot, are you brand loyal to, say, Sony lenses, or do you look at Tamron or Sigma or Rokinon?
So for my A6000, which is my exterior camera, I've always used the Rokinon 12mm, so 2.0. So the rest of my lenses right now are Sony. And I tried what was it? It was Samyang. I tried a Samyang lens for video once and had to send it back. It didn't work out. But so right now I have one Rokinon and the rest are all Sony.
And mostly all you shoot is either stills or video for real estate. Is that correct?
Right. I don't photograph people or anything like that. No.
I don't like doing portraits, and I really don't like doing weddings.
Yeah, I've never done a wedding. I thought about that. I was like, oh my gosh, imagine if something went wrong. You can't redo it. So, I wouldn't want all the stress about that. That would be very, that would freak me out a little bit, to be honest.
And, speaking of that, one thing I found with weddings is people, or photographers in particular, there's a certain artistic value there, and it's very easy for the couple or the couple's parents or whoever not to like your style.
Yeah, I got to imagine that that would be one issue, but I just think about it, I'm like, there's probably 1,000 different things that could jam that all up, complicate it. You got a lot of different personalities, a lot of emotions going on. It's supercharged. In fact, the whole thing is literally an emotion-based event, whereas what I do is essentially a sub-branch of commercial photography. Everybody's looking about, is this going to do the job, do it well, and do it well for the price point that we're at, and that's really all they care about. And I like the straightforward nature of that versus a giant emotional event like a wedding or maybe like a bar mitzvah or anything like that.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, the lenses that you use, are they mainly prime lenses, or do you have any zooms that you use also?
No, I on my main interior stills camera. I use the 16-35 f4 for the most part. Sometimes I'll pull it off and use the 50 1.8 just for some detail shots, but not as much as you would think. Usually maybe 1 in every 20 houses will be, quality-wise where I'm like, you know what, let's use the 50. And then for my video, I've settled in. I have basically almost permanently welded the 12-24 to my A7S II. And I use it almost exclusively at 16, but in that second floor where sometimes on smaller houses where you'll have the bedrooms all bunched together and narrow hallways that you got to get through, I'll go to 14 on those spaces. But typically I only use it at 16 or 14 on the 12-24 for video.
You are listening to the world's greatest photography podcast with your host, Bill Howard.
But you're listening to the world's greatest photography podcast, and you can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram by just searching for Conscious Creative Media. And again, we're here with Brian Kurtz, who has a unique perspective in that he used to be a real estate agent as well. And so he knows what agents look for. Now, Brian, you can find on Instagram at It's Brian Kurtz. And that brings us to this question: Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, Brian?
So, truthfully, if you're talking about using it for business purposes, I don't get very much business from any of them. I post pretty faithfully, but the vast majority of all my business is because I sought out relationships face-to-face or referrals from the people that I sought out face-to-face. And I'm really kind of not sold on spending huge amounts of time or resources trying to crack the social media code to get customers. I just feel like it's faster just to go out and get them. Now, that's just me. I know, I listen to a lot of podcasts, and there's lots of people that sing the song about using Facebook ads or whatever, but I've never found that to be the case for me myself.
And the way I mainly use Facebook. I've been successful with Twitter in a past life, I'm going to say, but I've never been able to get into Instagram. But basically what I do with Facebook is, when people think of photography, I want them to think of me. That it's just a branding thing, to be honest with you. I post daily, and I love photography, so I shoot daily, I post daily. But if somebody thinks that they need photography for basically anything, whether it's for their business, commercial work, real estate, whatever, I want them to think, well, Bill Howard does that. And I think that's the best way to use the social media in that regards.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah.
Now, do you use back button focus or shutter release?
So 95% or more of my shots are manual focus. I use back button autofocus when I do use autofocus for exterior shots with my A7 III, but I don't do focus at all with the A6000 because it's hyperfocal. So we just lock it in, tape the focus ring down, just left of infinity, and as long as it's at f8 or higher on your f-stop, it'll always be in focus. So, I shot with the A6000 exclusively from when I started in February of 2016 till September of 2017, and so I never focused for a year and a half at all. I put it right at left of infinity, taped it down, and everything came out fine. So that's kind of my focus story there. Yeah.
Exactly. And for real estate, for those that are new to it or looking to get into it, you're not looking for a narrow depth of field. You want everything there. You want to be able to see everything in focus.
Right.
Unless you're going for some architectural work, but basically for real estate, you want everything in focus.
Exactly. Exactly.
Now, do you use a tilt shift at all?
I don't. You only got so much money to spend, and each year, you've got to prioritize which purchases you're going to make. This past 2 years, I've been prioritizing buying stuff for my video kit. Tilt shift probably will be in the future, but I don't know how far in the future. realistically. I've kind of got, I would like to get a Fuji GFX 100 because I'm thinking about moving into the architecture side. I'm moving in that direction right now. And, a 24 tilt shift mounted to the Fuji is like a 17. And, there's a guy, Sam Chen, who's on a lot of the real estate photography forums. He uses a 5DS with the 17, and he swears that's the only lens you need for real estate and architecture, because as long as you have a really high megapixel camera, you can crop to zoom like crazy in post. So that would be my dream camera, a GFX 100 with a Canon 24 tilt shift with the adapter on it. So how long it will take me to be able to buy those things, I don't know, right? Yeah.
And a lot of people on the sports side, real estate side, it's not always about having all of the equipment right in the beginning. Because I'm not going to make much money with a 600 millimeter shooting sports. Mm-hmm. So there's no reason for me to spend that money there unless I can see a return on investment. If I'm doing it for a hobby, I mean, people spend money on their hobbies, but business purposes, you've got to keep it in check.
Yeah, exactly.
Now you're big on, and I'm sorry, you're big on using flash or the flambient style for real estate. Is that correct?
Yeah, so flash ambient composite photography. At this point, for interiors, I've scaled it back a little bit, and I'm about 50-50 for real estate. When I first started out, right out of the gate, I never shot ambient only. I always used flash, and I always use flash on pretty much every frame that I shot on interiors. I don't use, obviously, flash on exteriors, even for twilights. Some guys do that, but I don't do that. But for interiors, I used flash pretty much exclusively. If for nothing else, then it allows for really, really effective and consistent color correction. You can use your flash layer and your ambient layer in Photoshop and clean up the color. Ambient shots tend to have all kinds of color cast problems from different lighting sources being different color temperatures versus the daylight coming in through the windows. And you can kind of combat that a little bit just by turning off all the lights and shooting all ambient, but then that introduces different problems. So sometimes you want to use, you want to bring up the light levels, so you want to use your interior lights. Now you're injecting color problems. But if you have a flash frame, you can layer one on top of the other with the ambient on top, switch it to the luminosity blend mode, and it'll forget all of the color from the ambient frame and just use the color from the clean colored flash frame below it, and bam, your color problems are solved. So I've used that heavily until late last year. I started experimenting with editors, and I started, I didn't trust them at first, and I tried a few different ones, and I would send them just a few frames, and over time, more and more, and I would just start getting blown away with how well they could do with a set of 5 ambient brackets, and the color correction they could do, and the consistency and the good look of it. I'm like, this is within 5% of what I'm spending hours creating myself. So I was like, why am I doing that? I can deliver these things with slight tweaks. I never get them back from an editor and just send them right out. I always import them into Lightroom and apply my own final tweaks to them, because they don't do them 100% the way you'd want them to deliver them. You always got to put your own, final spices on them. It's kind of like being a chef, right? Right? The big chef, he teaches all the younger chefs how to do his recipes his way, but before the plate goes out to the customer, he puts the final garnish on, he approves it, and he says, okay, send that one out. Then they send the whole next dinner over to him. He looks it over, final garnishes, send it out. And so he's, maintaining quality control over his product, but he doesn't feel compelled to, to make every single dish from scratch himself, or it's not going to be good enough for his restaurant. And I adopt that same type of principle now with my photography, and the result has been that in big rooms, deep spaces, the kitchen stretching into the living room, all those deep spaces that would require, you just set up a whole bunch of lights and spend a relatively large amount of time just for those deep spaces, just to say, hey, I did it with Flash. I pretty much don't do those anymore with Flash. I just shoot them 5-shot ambient brackets, and they come out just fine. Smaller rooms tend to be the ones with the problems because you got smaller windows cut into the bedrooms, and those ambient light sources are more intense and localized, and so color problems are more of an issue. And so I still typically do smaller spaces with at least a 3-shot ambient set and a Flash frame, and I send that out to the editor too, and it comes back with better color and all kinds of stuff like that. So, but I'm not very dogmatic about it anymore like I used to be. It used to be like every single frame has to have Flash or it's not up to my standards. Now I'm a little bit more realistic about the whole thing.
Right.
Yeah.
And now most of the house, and I'm kind of getting off the spray and pray thing here, but most of the houses you shoot, are they strictly for MLS, or are you doing brochures?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, the agents will, like, especially Coldwell Banker, they automatically have like a brochure thing, right? So their front desk people automatically create folders and brochures from them and stuff. But I mean, I've not had any complaints about any of my photos as they've been printed out. I send them 2 sets too. I send them an MLS size set with 2048 pixels on the long side, and a print size set at 3000 pixels on the long side, and they seem to be quite happy with that. And if I ever get any complaints, then I'll adjust, but they seem to be satisfied with the quality and the resolution and everything.
Well, now, do you do any of your own editing?
Yes, I do. So in Michigan, we have it's very seasonal. So the market begins to pick up basically the week after Super Bowl Sunday in February. The spring market really starts to be felt in March, and then the full market is April straight through September, with a slowdown. Straight through August would be the busy season. April through August, A through A, and then it slows down in September and October, and then the dark times happen. It's like they put a screeching brakes on November 1st. And my business comes off about 80% from my highest month to my lowest month, which will either be December or January. It's going to be one of those 2 months is going to be the lowest month. So you have an 80% drop in revenue and gross revenue in those times. And so when it's the slow season, I will edit more of my own work because I don't have as much work to do. So why not save on the editing costs and fill my day with something instead of just twiddling my thumbs? But that's pretty much it. But once March gets here, I outsource everything.
When you do edit, do you use Windows or Mac?
Windows.
How about Adobe or DaVinci?
Always been using Adobe.
Lightroom or Photoshop?
Both.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, do you use a plugin such as, Infuse for any HDR work or anything like that?
No, especially not now. I used to use in the first year I created like probably 7 different workflows trying to figure out the perfect balance between quality and speed and stuff like that. So I experimented briefly with all ambient stuff. I couldn't get it to work right. And at that time, though, I used the Infuse GUI, the standalone app. And so I would import all the raw files, do my initial pre-merge tweaks to them, export them out as JPEGs, throw them all into the GUI because it's the fastest merger. And then later on, as I was going through this experimental process, I actually tried shooting them right in JPEG, which worked just fine. And that way I didn't have to export them out from the RAWs to the JPEG prior to throwing them into Infuse GUI. I could just take them right out of the camera, put them in a folder, throw the whole folder in there, and it would do them all up at once. The quality on that was just fine. And then you load them into Lightroom, hit them with your preset and after, instead of hitting them with the preset first. But again, once I found editors that do really, really good work with all ambient stuff, I just shoot the 5-shot brackets now. I do send all my ambient. If it's an all ambient shot, I send them out. I don't edit those myself. I don't like sitting around fiddling, with adjustment tool bubbles to try to get this yellow cast out from this corner, and then having to do it again and again in three, because you shot the same shot from 3 rooms, so you want color consistency. I don't like doing any of that. So if it's an all ambient shot, even in the winter, I'm going to have my editors do it. I only edit exteriors and flash enhanced shots myself.
Well, be sure to catch us on all the podcast sites at the World's Greatest Photography Podcast and on YouTube at Conscious Creative Media with CRE8IVE. And you can also catch Brian at It's Brian Kurtz on Instagram, as well as check out his website at MichiganVideoTours.com. If you are listening to the podcast, stay tuned right after this break. We'll get into segment 2 with Brian. If you're watching on YouTube, catch segment 2 on Wednesday. You are listening to Brian Kurtz on the World's Greatest Photography Podcast.
Why you be all on my line about nothing? Why won't you go get you $1 or something? Get you $1 or something. Why you be all on my line about nothing? Why won't you go get you $1 or something? Get you $1 or something. Why you be all on my line about nothing? Why won't you go get you $1 or something? Get you $1 or something. Why you be all on my line about nothing? Why won't you go get you